Have you ever heard of the term the divorce from hell? Probably every family breakdown has hellish aspects to it, but everything is relative, even high conflict divorces. Today we're going to meet a woman who emerged from divorce hell with a mission. Author Karen Stewart.
Brought to you by AdviceScene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
After a hellish divorce, our guest today is on a mission to save as many people as possible from making the same mistakes she made. She's written a book called Clean Break, and she urges people who are contemplating or going through a separation to learn from what she calls her poor choices and misplaced trust. Welcome, Karen Stewart, to Family Matters.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I am holding up your book, Clean Break, which I must tell you was an extremely painful read for a judge to read. You really did go through divorce hell.
Yeah, it was, I actually sometimes refer to it as the gong show. The gong show. But thankfully, after all that journey, I was able to sort of capture some of my lessons and hopefully share them through my book and through...
And that's why you're here. I think people need to know a little bit about that journey. You and your ex-husband had 3 children, and you found out he was having an affair. Your marriage counselor, who sounds like a real piece of work, gave you what you call incredibly bad advice.
Well, what's interesting, this happened now 10 years ago, and it just seemed to go from bad to worse. And I remember at the time thinking there's got to be some lessons in there. But one of the things they said was if this plane is going to crash, we want to at least try and have a safer landing. And I thought, that's when I should have stopped the brakes immediately and went, perhaps I need to go in another direction.
Absolutely. Your divorce process took 4 years. You spent $500,000 on legal fees, and that's just what you spent. Do you have any idea what your ex-husband spent?
I suspect it was around the same.
$1 million divorce. What in the world could have caused you and your ex-husband to spend $1 million? You were not that wealthy.
No.
You had a business.
No. Our assets did not justify that kind of expenditure.
And you're a highly educated professional, a financial manager. He had the same education. I'm just dumbfounded that this could have happened. I don't get it. Even after reading the book, what caused you both to just keep that fight going to the tune of $1 million?
Well, I think you almost need to go back to the beginning. I think when people are on the doorsteps of divorce, there's 2 big things playing out. One of those is the emotions and all the fear and the anxiety associated with the decisions that are going to need to be made. And I remember having a conversation with a lawyer at the time, and I said, I got to go get a good lawyer. I got to go hire a good lawyer. And he said, Karen, here is one thing you need to know. By the step you're about to take, you're actually giving up control. While you might perceive that you're taking control, you're giving up control.
By hiring a lawyer?
Exactly.
Well, you actually had 5 lawyers.
Did
they each get $100,000? Is that how it came up to 500?
I think it was scattered all over the place.
Oh, really? But you had 5 lawyers.
I had 5 lawyers because, in fact,
so you gave up control 5 times.
Yes, exactly.
Why? What was wrong with the first, second, third, or fourth? Because I'll bet you didn't get 5 judges.
It was just a series of events that I look back and I thought, how could this possibly happen? But what I found after the fact, and when I actually started to go out and research, which I did, I researched in the United States, I researched in Canada, long before I wrote the book, to see, was I a lone man on the island?
I wasn't.
I wasn't.
I can tell you you're not.
Yes. And so it's just a whole series of, you see, divorce is really quite simple. It's 2 things, money and children. We need to make good decisions around money and children. But we're in a process of chaos. Why? Because of our emotions. And then we're put into a system where we're filling out affidavits, which I always say affidavits are based on perception, not fact.
But wait a minute. You don't get into that system. Once you're into affidavits, you're into litigation, you're into court. But when you first go to a lawyer in the divorce process, the first step isn't to go running to court. So those affidavits shouldn't be there yet. You're supposed to be negotiating a settlement. Isn't that how it works?
Well, that's what you would think.
Well, that's what they tell us judges, that of all of the people who break up, only 5% of them ever go to court. The other 95% resolve it. How did you end up in that 5% and make it go so long and so bad?
Well, I think some of the things is affidavits often will get prepared and not actually end up in the courts, right? So there's also immediately what happens is position bargaining, right? Two clients will take a position on where they feel strength, and they will use that as their position to bargain from. That shows up in letters and communication and correspondence, and in that correspondence and communication can be fuel on an emotional fire that's already taken place. So the problem is we're naive. We don't know what to do. We often say, our lawyers will say, I look to you, Karen, to tell us, you really need to direct me. I'm your lawyer. I will take instructions from you. Well, here I was, an incredibly educated woman. I couldn't even put 1 plus 1 together in my own case.
Why?
Why? I think it's partly because the system, I didn't understand how the system played out. I didn't understand the consequences of the correspondence that I didn't necessarily edit and look at that went from my lawyer to his lawyer.
Did anybody offer you any kind of information other than a lawyer that said you're giving up control? Were there any resources for you to actually find out? I mean, obviously this show wasn't around. My book wasn't there. Was there any information at all?
No, I think you for me, and certainly speaking for myself, I was looking to the people that I had chosen to surround myself with to give me the advice.
And you had been told that these were capable?
Oh, listen, I would speak very highly of them as professionals in that they were well respected, they're the top of their game, and that's what I kept thinking. My goodness, I am paying a substantial amount per hour, the best that money can buy in this city. How is it possible that every single week my life is getting destroyed, my assets are being destroyed,
well,
my
what
children
were you
are
fighting
being destroyed?
over? Were you fighting over the children?
This is what's so ironic. When I look back, it was attack, react, attack,
over
react.
What? The business?
It could be who was going to get them on Friday night. It could be the fact that at one point in time we were fighting over spousal support. At one point in time we were fighting over who was going to get the business. That the next day we were fighting over who was going to get the children. But the problem is it was so intertwined, and I kept thinking there was no methodology and no logic approach to any kind of resolution.
Well, that gives us a very good starting point from which we are going to find out what were the lessons that you learned that you want to share with other people. We'll get to that right after this break. Welcome back to Family Matters. Joining me is Karen Stewart, who is the author of a book called Clean Break. Karen, before the break, you were telling us about the very, very high conflict divorce that you and your ex-husband went through that lasted 4 years and cost $1 million. I think we should point out, though, that your situation is not really typical in the sense that you owned a business together. There was a business that had to get sorted out. Either you buy him out, he buy you out, or you both sell it. And that did aggravate the situation. That's not always the case in every relationship.
I think that's a good point. I think that the complexity of some of the financial issues made it a little more challenging to sort through the numbers.
But that being said, you were not Donald Trump. This was not a mega industry with hundreds of employees. It was a small family business that ought not to have eaten up $1 million in fees. Now, you said that you learned a lot of lessons, and one of the first ones was free yourself from denial.
Well, I think, and that is very true. As I was going through this, I thought, there has to be a better way. But how do we start putting that together? And one of the things that I noticed in my divorce is that again, it's about removing the emotions from your decision making.
How?
And part of that is surrounding yourself with people who can help you get through it. And I say to people, you need to find two different groups. The people who are going to tell you what you want to hear, because those are your friends and family who can tell you how horrible your ex was, that you need to hear that.
And that you're the victim.
And you're the victim. and it's all going to be fine. And then you need to surround yourself with people who tell you what you need to hear. And what I needed was very grounded, solid advice, right? Which is, you're about to make some very important decisions in your life around money and children, period. In order to do that, here are some ways to move through that. That being said, you're also going through one of the most difficult journeys of your lifetime. Your denial, fear, chaos. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Anger.
Pain, everything. However,
and if you want to know why she had that pain and that anger, you read the book. And you'll find out why her marriage ended.
Yes.
But it was pretty painful.
It was painful. But you know what? A lot of people are in that kind of pain.
You're telling me.
Exactly.
You're telling me.
Exactly.
No, when I read your book, it was very obvious to me that the pain and the sense of chaos you went through had nothing to do with your level of education, with your sophistication, with your ability to give other people advice about their finances. And that's really quite frustrating for a judge, because we see people who in every aspect of their lives are perfectly in control and make sound decisions, and yet when it comes to the dissolving of a romantic relationship, a partnership, they just can't do it. So you needed to be surrounded by people that would tell you what you needed to hear. Well, what did you need to hear?
Well, you know, and the other thing is this is good people in a bad situation. I felt like a real, like I was the bad guy all the way through through my divorce and proceedings, which again is a way of which the system works in that position bargaining. So you need to start with, okay, my marriage is over. I need to come to terms with that. I need to align myself with some people to help me. Sociologists, psychologists, I don't care what you do, get some help, and get some help from people who can help you. And then make decisions how you're going to move through and make good decisions.
You also said that many professionals in the traditional divorce system, quote, feed mercilessly on the naive. What professional, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but what professionals feed mercilessly on the naive?
Well, you know, I think that, you know, I really try not to bash any kind of professional, but I do believe that
go ahead, I've heard it all.
But I do believe there's a responsibility with people who are giving advice to ensure that those they're giving advice to understand the entire picture.
Well, how are we supposed to know?
You know,
these people are in a state of numbness. You know, every day in court, I try my best to explain the consequences of what's happening and their behavior and their decisions. I don't know how much of it they get. Because they're so anxious.
That's right, and that is where us as professionals, even me now and what I do now, it's my responsibility to hold that place of objectivity and understand that my client is coming from a place of crisis and chaos.
But who is it that's feeding mercilessly?
Well,
I'm not letting you get away with it. I want to know.
Well, I'm sorry, but I would say there are some people in the legal system, there are lawyers that are doing it, there are psychologists that are doing it. Anybody who I think puts their own personal ego and their pocketbook ahead of the well-being of their clients, I would profess that many of those fall within that category.
But I have to tell you, I'm not going to deny that there are lawyers and other professionals who are maybe not as good as others. I would be dishonest if I told you that they're all great. But I can tell you that most lawyers that I deal with in my court really do try to help people resolve things, because most people aren't rich and they're paying by the hour, and they're not going to be able to afford a lawyer very long, and the lawyer has nothing to gain by extending the case because they're not going to get paid.
And that is that's so accurate, because here's the issue, right? Is the system itself is fundamentally flawed because they are hired to represent a client and therefore win on that client's behalf. That to me is counterintuitive to what we need with people moving through divorce. So I don't know that it's as much as the people as it is the system and the way and the methodology that we use to bring resolution in our system in divorce. That is where I think the issue is.
Well, you've said that you should not place your trust in people who have no accountability for the outcome. Well, who's going to have accountability for your outcome? Shouldn't it be you? Shouldn't you be accountable for your children, for your future, for your decisions? I mean, you made the decision to marry this man. You know, I say people to court in court every day. I say, you've chosen this person to be the mother of your child or the father of your child. You chose them. Shouldn't you be accountable for the consequences of those choices?
I totally agree. In fact, I am a huge advocate of accountability, and throughout my entire book I talk about the absolute last place you want to be in is in victimization. However, I come from the background of being in financial and being a stockbroker for 20 years. I was held accountable by the rates of returns I got in my clients' stock portfolios. I was paid according to that. Our system is not necessarily compensated by accountability and by outcome. And there, I think, is a little bit of a disconnect. We're not all sitting on the same side of the table.
You also said that you've got to trust your intuition, and that one of the biggest mistakes you made is that you didn't listen to that voice inside you telling you to pull the plug.
Yes, and again, I think intuition is actually a skill, and I think it's almost something we need to work at. In times of crisis and chaos, we lose touch with it. If you can do anything to hold on to that and trust it, that's what you need to do. In my situation, I lost contact with my intuition, and that cost me a lot.
Well, I can tell that you came out of the process a very strong and very determined person to really make sure that no one else goes through the pain you did. When we come back, I'm going to be asking our guest what else she has to say about the legal profession. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Family Matters with author Karen Stewart. Karen, during the break, I started thinking about the analogy of a stockbroker being accountable. It seems to me that when I've made investments and my broker lost me money, I didn't get that money back from the broker. How would you expect a lawyer to be accountable if you're the one that has to give the lawyer the instructions, right? Like, isn't it the job of the lawyer to give you the advice, tell you what the options are, and then you decide? So why is the lawyer have to be accountable?
I think in theory that's exactly right, but I think in practice what happens is that there's a lack of understanding of how the process is going to unfold and the risk that you're going to have to take on in order to accomplish certain things.
But how can someone tell you how the process is going to unfold if they don't know what the other side of the case is going to do?
They know a lot more than any new client that walks in their door, regardless of that client's level of education. They understand that it could go on for years. They understand that what you ask for and what you want is not likely what you're going to get. They understand that the judge is going to get a little bit of the picture and make a big decision on a little bit of the picture. They know that, and I feel like there's an obligation. Just like as a broker, I had a responsibility to say, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what's going to happen. But I had a responsibility to talk about risk and return, and how much you're going to risk, and what is the potential return. And I really believe that we need to do a little more time at the beginning and I think that's the way to start to be accountable.
Now, I don't think anyone reading your book will be surprised when I say that you're not very complimentary to the legal profession, and you've pointed out 4 flaws that you think family law lawyers have that really impact negatively on their clients. The first one you said is that they get in the way of resolution rather than facilitate it. And that took me by surprise because, like I said, almost every lawyer I see in court is trying to settle the case. They're really settlement oriented, they're child focused. They know that litigation is bad for parents and family court is bad for children.
So first of all, I want to say is that almost my entire family are lawyers, so I always have to be careful when I'm talking about
Did they proofread your book?
Yeah, well, no, they didn't, but they read after.
Are they still talking to you?
Oh, yes, they are.
Okay.
They are.
Well, so am I, and I'm a judge.
Exactly.
But what did you mean?
Well, again, I think it goes back to the skill set. So, like I'm very pro-lawyer. My entire family are lawyers. I think I'm the only non-lawyer almost in the family. But I believe that there is a different way that lawyers are trained that sometimes is not in line with resolution. And plus the system, the ability to understand the actual contents of a case, it's filtered. It's filtered for the clients and their misperceptions, and then it's filtered through their lawyer, and then it's communicated. Again, there's levels of misunderstanding and misperceptions all along, and we end up with a lot of chaos, like we did in my case.
You also mentioned the accountability, but we've really discussed that. The third point you said is that lawyers inflame emotional wounds to gain advantages for their client.
Yes.
We inflame emotional wounds.
Yes. Yes, and in fact, I'm not just talking about my case. Now I've had the opportunity, now that I've been in the business for a number of years, people will forward me little letters back and forth of the correspondence that's happened between their counsel and the other party's counsel. The reality is there's a layering. It's not like, can our client have this? Or there's a layering in the correspondence that ultimately arrives at the doorstep in the mail of the client that inflames the emotion. And it does nothing to bring resolution. When you look at divorces, even complicated like mine, they're not that complicated. They're not. It should have been resolved within 2 or 3 months.
I think what you're saying is that the system is too adversarial. It's a win-lose mentality, and people get caught up in it, and it becomes an emotional thing.
It's adversarial, but the structure, again, having 2 lawyers, 2 different clients with entirely different perceptions, trying to communicate, then perhaps ending up in court, then bringing in a judge into that situation. How is it possible to find the facts?
Well,
it's very hard.
What do you say to people that say, well, look, only 5% of people that break up ever go to court. The other 95% seem to work it out without going to court. A 95% success rate seems good, and most of those people go to lawyers. What's your answer to that?
Well, again, of those 95% that maybe don't end up in court, they could have ended up in the doorsteps of court.
Yes.
They may have ended up with running out of money, which is often the case.
And they may end up very angry with each other.
That was what the most important thing is there probably is so much destruction done already that
See, that's
and
what
they
we
run out
don't
of
know.
money. Exactly.
I have to agree with you that we really don't know. When we say that the settlement rate is very high, and that's true even for people who go to court. Most cases settle. They don't go to trial. Most. We don't know what is the aftermath. These people who still have to deal with each other over their children for another 20 years. What's the aftermath?
And what's the legacy we're creating for our generations to come?
I think it's fair to say, though, if you just speak to anyone who's been through a divorce, they're not usually happy with each other afterwards. They're not better friends at the end than they were at the beginning.
And isn't that unfortunate? Divorce is an event in our life. It doesn't have to define it. And yet how we move through it is starting to define it.
And that is probably the best way to sum up the show. Thank you so much for being here on the show, Karen. From all of us here at Family Matters, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.